Streaming live via the Internet. Welcome to ISP Radio, your weekly source for ISP-related news, events, and interviews with industry experts. If you deliver Internet via fiber optic, wireless, coax, or any other way, you're in the right place. Chat live with us weekly via ispradio.com every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time. And now a brief word from our sponsors. Link Technologies, providing ISP consulting, support, and hardware for wireless ISPs. TowerCoverage.com, providing online RF coverage maps. Mimosa Networks, providing high-density, high-bandwidth radio products. Advanced LLC, providing retail and wholesale advanced communication services by matching providers with your bandwidth needs. And by Sitel, providing reliability in surge suppression. And now your host for ISP Radio, Steve Grabiel and Dennis Burgett.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to ISP Radio. Today, Steve is out actually on vacation. I still do not know how a WISP owner actually got to go on vacation, but hey, whatever. So today you just got me, and we're going to be talking with Elisabeth Bowles. We're going to be talking about the WISPA advocacy days, the lobbyists, and all the good work that WISPA has been doing for our industry, of course. So, Elisabeth, are you there?
I am.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, Elisabeth, I know you just got back from D.C., and you met with tons and tons of people. Tell me what happened. What did we talk about? What was the whole event?
Well, this is something we do biannually, which is our advocacy summit, and we fly in a number of members of WISPA to talk to our representatives about issues that impact the fixed wireless industry. A lot of times we go in with spectrum concerns, but this particular time we focused on the recent FCC rulings, both on municipal broadband and applying Title II to Internet providers. And we also talked about some issues with the USDA's Community Connect grant program and how you can protect unlicensed spectrum from LTE-U, LAA. And this is the first time we've had a summit with our new lobbyist, Ari Storch. We had about 25 people on the Hill, and we met with 30 reps, and we had a keynote speaker from Senator Jerry Moran, who's the chair of the Agriculture Committee.
Excellent. So,
yeah.
So what did we? What was the general? I mean, we talked about everything, obviously.
Yeah.
FCC. We have Title II and some other issues. What specifically was the messages that we really tried to get to them?
Well, we tried to make sure our representatives understand that WISPs are, in large measure, privately funded small businesses serving rural and underserved parts of the country, and that as such we have a unique stature in the Internet ecosystem where we provide a service in places that no one else is, and that as such we deserve certain protections that recognize both the fact that we are privately funded and that we're small businesses. A lot of the rulings that the FCC did to protect net neutrality, we don't have a problem with. For example, the Bright Line rules, no throttling, no paid prioritization. We have no problem with those rules. The problem we have is with the application of Title II regulations and form filling out and all of these things that don't really apply to our industry. Title II, of course, was a statute from 1934 that was designed to regulate telecommunication companies, people who are offering phone over copper lines. And so it's really not applicable in the modern IP transit universe, and the harm they were trying to cure were large providers who were throttling traffic or requiring paid or threatening that they would require paid prioritization. And in order to keep the Internet free and open, they felt that they needed to apply Title II to Internet providers. The FCC recognized that small businesses had a unique position, and they applied a temporary carve-out for small businesses where a lot of the reporting requirements don't, and the transparency requirements don't actually apply to small businesses, but that expires on December 31st. We like that to be permanent. We think that small businesses are not the bad actors here. We aren't the market players who are throttling and doing all of these things, and a lot of our members will be severely financially harmed by the compliance requirements of Title II. So we went in and asked them to make the small business exemption permanent.
Gotcha. Now, let me make sure I got this right, because first off, I have not read the entire Title II 400-page monster thing.
Nor have I.
And I also think that there's a lot of things that reference, the Title II data and things like that. So there's probably actually a lot more reading that actually has to be done to understand it all. I'm under the impression that under Title II, small businesses, and I believe they classified it 100,000 subscribers and under.
Yes.
Okay. Are forbeared. If I'm using the word properly, forbeared from a lot of the reporting requirements and a lot of the burdensome things that especially small businesses would have a hard time working with and complying with. Are you telling me that December 31st this year, next year? This year, that even though that Title II now applies to us and we're forbeared, that forbearance is only till December 31st?
Yes, the small business exception is only through December 31st of this year.
And
we don't know that they won't extend it, but we don't know that they will.
Gotcha. And government is notorious for being not very fast.
True that.
In there. So even if they needed to, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will get it done by that deadline. So now we're going to Congress, we're going to senators, we're going to Congress people, things like that we're trying to get them to push the FCC to do this, or are we trying to get legislation passed that forces the FCC to do this, or is it completely outside the FCC scope?
No, it's not outside the FCC scope. It is absolutely on the FCC. And if the FCC would do this on their own and make that exemption permanent, I think that would be good. And so I think the answer to your question is actually yes. We would like them to push the FCC a little bit and have them focus on the small business issues and address whether they're going to make this exemption permanent. And if not, why not? And secondarily, we would like to see legislation if the FCC is not going to act, if the FCC is not going to protect small businesses, we would like to see legislation to that effect that carves out small businesses. And if you have a second, I'll address that 100,000 number.
Sure.
That's a very interesting number, and it actually covers every single WISP in the country except for one. Which is the largest WISP, but the small cable manufacturers are going in, cable internet service providers are going in and saying that that's too low. That number came from a cable regulatory ruling from several years back where the small cable companies came in. There was some compliance thing that the cable companies were going to have to do immediately, and the small cable cos came in and said, well, we need longer because we're smaller, and the FCC agreed. The FCC asked them how small is small, and they said 100,000 people, 100,000 subs. So when the FCC went to look at how to define a small business, instead of going to the Small Business Administration definition or any of the other definitions that exist for small business, they went back to this cable ruling and said, okay, it's 100,000 subs.
And do we know why they would have done that? Precedent.
They had that number, and they thought that it was
easier to get that number than to go to the SBA.
The Small Business Administration calculations require actually a little more work because they're based on a lot of different factors like number of employees or revenue, or they're based on different things, and subs was really clean. And this is a little bit of a political statement, but I think the FCC wanted to get this done as soon as they could. And they realized maybe three-quarters of the way through the decision they'd already made, before it became public, the FCC pretty much already knew what they were going to do, I think, having been in some meetings with them. And they realized kind of late in the game that they had not done their due diligence with respect to the impact on small business. And they're statutorily required to look at, it's the Paperwork Reduction Act, they're actually required to look at what the impact is going to be on companies, and they didn't do that. And I think they realized they didn't do that, and so they punted it and put in this exemption to the end of the year to give themselves time to actually look at the impact on small businesses. But meanwhile, there's no certainty. We don't have any idea whether we, the WISPs, we the small cable companies, don't have any idea whether this is going to end up hitting us like a ton of bricks on January 1st, 2016 or not.
Can you do you know what those reporting requirements would entail in some or some part?
I know some. There's some transparency requirements. I actually am not as familiar with Title II and what all the forms are going to have to be filling out, but I do know that the transparency requirements are a big one, and they're part of this whole open internet order, which of course was the whole point of this. I mean, they went into Title II, they pulled up Title II, or pulled in Title II, however you want to say that, specifically because they couldn't get it done under other sections of the Communications Act. So they wanted net neutrality. The whole point of this was net neutrality. It's not really, I don't think, so much to regulate the internet as it is to ensure net neutrality. But I don't know.
Gotcha. I mean, I know one of the people that I had talked with and was specifically talking about the reporting requirements. Is one of those things was, you know, he has his legal contract for service. He has his legal contract for towers. He has his privacy policy, his terms and services, and all those types of things. And normally, he said he goes to the local lawyer that's in his area, and basically that lawyer reviews it for, of course, legal accuracy, but also to ensure that it follows the rules and regulations in the jurisdiction that he's in, the state, the county, etc. Now, or before, he said he could go to this attorney and pay like $130 or $150 an hour and actually get it done in a reasonable amount of time, fairly quickly, and for a fairly low cost. Now he's saying that in all retrospects, he's going to have to take those same things and go out to some type of telecom attorney, somebody that understands Title II, somebody that understands the rules and regulations that Title II imposes on us now. And that attorney now has that broader scope. He understands the issues that come with Title II. The problem is as soon as you say telecom lawyer, now you're at $500 or $600 an hour.
Right.
And it's not a local guy. It's not something that and now all of a sudden the cost went from, say, $3,000 to $5,000. If he took all of his documents and sent it to a lawyer, he said it'd be between $3,000 and $5,000 depending on how much it is. He goes, now if you assume the same amount of time, it's almost $20,000 to $25,000.
Right, and I think that's really, you're hitting on exactly the problem. Because, and there are WISPs, an article came out in Ars Technica recently, and they found a company who said, you know, I'm not worried about it, I'm not even going to hire an attorney. And I appreciate that they feel comfortable with that, but the bottom line is you're going to need to hire an attorney. You may not think you do, but if you're not using an attorney now, you'll have to get one. And if you are using an attorney, you may not have the right one unless they are, like you said, a telecom lawyer. So you're looking at an increase in legal fees no matter what. And these, if you talk to the phone companies, one of the things we did this trip is we had a summit. And Jonathan Chambers, who is actually with U.S. Telecom, came in and talked about USF reform at the summit to kind of talk about that. But in the course of it, he was talking about Title II. And he lives in a Title II world. And he said, you know, you don't, he was telling the WISPs in the room, he said, you don't have any idea how many little potholes on the road there are. You might think you know, you might think you're doing the right thing, but then there's this thing that you think you ought to be able to do that you can't do. It's not actually legal because of some provision within that statute. So there's really not a way to comply with Title II and not have an attorney involved.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to it. You have to have someone that's familiar with it. You have to have someone that can actually help you in that aspect. And, you know, in most small WISPs, there's a lot of common sense that's done. I see a lot of people, you know, hey, it's common sense that this is how it needs to be done, etc. But now all of a sudden, even a small mom and pop, you know, a small WISP, I won't name any names, but I know of a small WISP that just started, you know, they got 30 subs. That's it. Just think of how much money it would take for them to start up if they had to do all this. And I sit there and I look at this legal document. If their startup capital if they had a small amount of startup capital and they assumed $2,000 to $3,000 for forming their LLC or something like that, plus adding reviewing the documents that they need reviewed for legality, $2,000-3,000, that's in a decent amount, or that is a decent amount of money for a startup WISP. And then you take that number and you flip it to 25,000. That is probably half of their entire startup budget.
Right.
I mean, who knows what it is? It makes all of a sudden getting into the internet industry and starting a WISP and starting and bringing internet service to those that don't have it that much more expensive.
Yeah, and the legal and economic term for that is a barrier to entry. And one of the reasons that WISPs have been so successful is that it's a very low barrier to entry. You can get started and make money with 30 people. 30 subs. You don't have to have these 2,000-3,000 subscribers like you do on a big cellular network. It's a very bite-sized business to start, and then you can grow it organically as you get subscribers. You increase your, and you can grow in a very measured way. That's historically how the industry has worked. And what this does is it creates a huge regulatory burden on the front end that makes it very hard to enter into the market in the first place, or you have to have a lot more money to do it, which by its very nature will prevent the thing it's trying to promote, which is the deployment of broadband in underserved areas.
Yeah, it's like they want to stop the deployment of broadband in underserved areas, unless you're a big company that already has the funding and the backing to do so.
Yeah. I think that it's the law of unintended consequences. I don't think they thought it through. They're not economists. They're regulatory people. All they look at is this is the thing I'm trying to get accomplished. This is the end that I'm trying to achieve, and these are the regulatory steps. But they don't understand market power. They're not the Federal Trade Commission. They don't understand what a monopoly is. They don't understand the economics and barriers to entry, and what they're creating is a disincentive to deploy in these markets, because why would you do it if the government's going to be all up in your business now? It's just very frustrating for an industry that has worked so hard to develop itself in the way that it has.
Yeah, and a lot of WISPA's success came from that low cost of entry into the market. I always use this example is Jim, my partner, he started his WISP because the location in which his daughter was living did not have high-speed internet for her to take her online college classes.
Right.
And that's literally how it starts. Hey, I need to provide internet up there. I have a DSL. Let's start with this. Let's share it out. Let's get some things up in the air. And then it just simply grows and grows and grows because people hear about it, word of mouth, etc. Well, I do have a question. How can both either WISPA members, existing members, or if you're not a WISPA member, how can you or those people help in the efforts for lobbying for getting these things done while maintaining the single point, not single point of contact, but the single message or singular message that WISPA wants to convey?
Well, for WISPA members, they can reach. Well, first of all, I highly recommend anyone who's a member of WISPA who's interested in participating to join either the Legislative Committee or the FCC Committee. Those two committees do a lot of work in Washington, file a lot of papers with Washington, and are the two most active committees with respect to this type of thing. I additionally encourage any WISPA member they can reach out to me, they can reach out to the WISPA board, and they can ask for our policy summary. It's not something we generally circulate because it is proprietary to WISPA, but it's something that any WISPA member is entitled to. So if they want to reach out to their own local legislators or representatives in Washington, we have a one-pager. It's actually a two-pager, but it's a talking points of all of our major legislative positions. I highly recommend that they get a copy of that from me and read it over and learn and understand them. They have to understand. You kind of asked me this question earlier. There are 700 different regulations that apply to common carriers under Title II, and we don't know which of those are going to apply to us and which aren't. So it's very important that WISPA members and anybody who is a small internet provider become educated on this issue. I've read a couple of articles where small internet providers, some of whom were not WISPA members and some of whom were, have been interviewed, and they haven't really been able to, they don't realize that they don't realize the nature of the problem. They may decide they're okay with it, and that's also fine, but from WISPA's position, it's important that we all be educated on what the problem is. What the FCC did and didn't do, and what they should have done differently is the primary thing. There was net neutrality legislation pending in Congress, which, in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, was what should have happened, is Congress should have been allowed to pass or not pass net neutrality legislation. That is the way to go. Trying to wedge this into Title II, I think, is probably outside the scope of the FCC's authority. There's my legal opinion for what it's worth, because I'm not a telecom lawyer. But people should be educated on this, and I encourage WISPs who are not members of WISPA to join WISPA, because that is this is where our money goes. It goes to protecting our industry and what we try to do.
Exactly. Well, obviously, if for those of you that are listening, if you would like to, there is a live chat button. You can click on that. You should still be able to get to the or listen in. If you have any questions, make sure you ask them. Going back to the positions of WISPA in this particular stance, are we really trying to focus on? And again, this is just a question that I got here. Are we trying to focus on getting the FCC or Congress or whoever it may be to repeal Title II for internet providers, or to basically overrule that or say that they cannot, or that's not in their jurisdiction, whatever the case may be? Or are we at the point of, yes, we understand Title II is here, we have to live with it, but we need to make sure that, as you said, one of those things is these forbearance items that expire at the end of the year. Are we just trying to simply say, hey, we need to get this more permanent so that ISPs don't have to deal with it, and we, Title II is fine as long as we get the benefits, but we don't have the reporting requirements until you get to a certain size?
I think that's actually a very good question. Ideally, Title II would never have been applied in the first place. That question is now in front of the courts. So the word we're getting back from Congress, well, the FCC, first of all, take a step back. The FCC is not going to reconsider their decision. Petitions for reconsideration are filed. The WISPA participated in a motion for stay in front of the FCC. That was denied. The FCC has made their decision, and they will stick to it. At least as long as we have the current administration, this is the decision of the FCC, and it's not really going anywhere, I don't think. So that's kind of a dead end. So with the FCC, we really are saying, look, you need to make this exemption permanent, and by the way, you need to expand it. There's another part of their ruling called this vague Internet Conduct Standard, which has to do with, are you a bad actor and how do you behave on the Internet? We'd like there to be an exemption for small businesses for that too, because that is just an invitation for litigation. So at least on the FCC front, we're definitely saying, look, you need to make this permanent. You need to expand it to include more stuff. We need to have certainty. When we talked to Congress this last trip, the word we got back was that with the courts having this in front of them, it's unlikely that Congress will pass legislation to undo what the FCC has done. There is a will in Congress to rewrite the entire Communications Act of 1934 to modernize it. That's been underway for a couple of years. The House Republicans had issued a series of white papers. WISPA responded to many of those regarding modernization, getting rid of Title II entirely. I think they're now calling it Title X or Title X, to try to create this whole new Communications Act. Realistically, you talked about the speed of government. That's 10 years out. That's not going to happen. It's not going to be helpful to any of us sitting here in the next immediate future or near-term future. The last time they did a rewrite, it took 10 years, and that was just the Telecom Act of 1996, which created information service providers, by the way, and created the category into which WISPs and small internet companies fit. That took 10 years. So rewriting the Telecom Act is not going to happen anytime soon. They're not going to pass legislation undoing what the FCC did as long as the courts are looking at it. So what we did say is, okay, we'd really like you to overturn this, but we get it. So we would very much like you to pass legislation or to consider legislation that would make the small business exemptions permanent. Because the problem with any forbearance by the FCC is that they can change their mind. So they decide today that they're going to forbear until December 31st. New administration, new FCC. You know what? I don't agree with that anymore. We're not going to forbear. We're now going to apply those to you guys. And there's no certainty.
Gotcha. And if Congress steps in, they can. Do they have to enforce, or do they have to tell the FCC that you have to allow this permanently?
Yes, they have the authority to do that. Now, whether the way that would work is Congress would come up with the bill. They'd pass it in the Senate. They'd pass it in the House. Then they do what's called a reconciliation. They'd get a final bill that they both agree to. They'd send it to the president, and he'll sign it or he'll veto it. And if he vetoes it, it goes back to the Congress, and they can override the veto. But that takes a supermajority to override a veto. So it's very important from small internet service provider perspective that both sides of the aisle, the Democrats and the Republicans, understand how critical this is to small business. Because in order to, it can't break along party lines and override a veto. The president won't agree to it if it breaks along party lines. It really has to be, and our message is universal. This isn't about Republicans or Democrats or even politics. This is about rural America and broadband and small businesses that are the backbone of the nation's economy. It just, and not to I'm sorry, I'm laughing at myself because I was talking to Senator Moran about something having to do with rural America, and I got very impassioned. And when I stopped speaking, he said, I can see that you have no passion and care nothing about this stuff. And of course, everybody laughed because I was being very impassioned at the moment.
Well, that's okay. I mean, that brings the emotion to the table, saying, "Hey, this is, I have my hands in this. This is something you're messing with, or has been messed with, and I'm really worried about it." And that's very important to get that emotion conveyed. Right.
But I got a call this morning from a small community that's saying, "Look, we're desperate. Can you come down here?" and I have to. And normally I'd be like, "Yeah, let me go look at that. They're an edge of our network. There would be fairly easy to get to." So it's like, "Yeah, let me look at that," would be my initial response. But now I have to temper that response with, "Well, let me look at that and let me make sure that I have the bandwidth to do it, that that I understand the regulatory environment, that every customer I add, I may or may not be paying USF. I don't know."
Yeah, I know a number of WISPs that basically have went into maintenance mode. They have stopped expanding. They're not looking to take on new things. They're really focusing on how can I take the investment I have and start maximizing. How can I add customers, upgrade their plans, basically get more cash, both reoccurring cash on hand, as well as how can I put money in the bank, because whenever I do have to do all this reporting, I'm going to have to hire somebody to get all my reporting done. I'm going to have to do all this, and I'm going to have this big cash expenditure that I'm not used to. So the only way I'm going to survive, and they're bracing, is what they're doing. They're saying, let's not spend a dime. We're basically broke. We're not spending a dime. We're taking all the cash we can and putting it into the bank and sitting on it, because, as you just said, in December, if they don't renew that forbearance, all of a sudden I need, $30,000 that I have to come up with out of my pocket, And I think, something that was suggested was it would be really, really interesting for someone that knows the telecom space a little bit better to come up with, hey, I'm a small business between 300 to 2,000 subs. What is my cost if now all of a sudden I have to do that regulatory requirement, the stuff that's been forbeared on? Is there a way that somebody could sit there and give us an estimated cost in its entirety? Because that is really a good number, something that you could sit there and take to a senator and says, you know, as soon as they do not forbear this and we have to report this, I immediately have to spend $40,000 to bring all my documents up to telecom lawyers. I have to do all this stuff for reporting within the first year just to start on the bandwidth. That's the real cost of what it's going to cost me to have to do that. I think that would be a really good piece of information to see.
Yeah, how much it costs. And I think that part of the problem is that we don't actually know what they're going to apply. And I'm going to actually quote Commissioner O'Reilly. He was one of the two commissioners who voted against this order. He said, Title II includes a host of arcane provisions. The idea that the Commission can magically impose or sprinkle just the right amount of Title II on broadband providers is giving the Commission more credit than it ever deserves.
And he's part of it.
And he's part of it. And he's saying there's no way. And his point is valid. I mean, as he said, it's an inappropriate framework for today's dynamic technologies. It's antiquated. It's old. But you're right. I mean, it would be great to know what that number is. I don't even know that you could go to a telecom. I guess you could go to a telecom lawyer and maybe get a rough number for what it would cost to bring you into compliance. But it can't be cheap.
Right.
I mean,
but I'm just saying is that's always a really good number to say, you know, I have a company that makes $130,000 gross income, and
right.
It's going to cost. And as soon as you do this, my first year estimated costs for legal fees and in reporting and compliance to this is $45,000, and that sends home a message to me.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So you know,
that's a good point.
It's maybe a good thought for somebody to do. So let's change gears here real quick. WISPA has recently hired a firm.
Yes.
And what is this firm? What are they doing for us? And again, this is part of why you join WISPA, so that you get these great people that have the experience and are fighting for our side, basically. But who is this person or the company? What have they done in the past? Where are we going with them? And what are they doing for us on a month-by-month basis, so that the membership knows that, hey, here's what work is actually being done for these guys, with these guys.
Sure. Okay, well, I'm going to give a little bit of history.
Sure.
But which is that when I first joined WISPA, we were a much smaller organization. We had under 200 members. We had no real presence in D.C. And we decided at the time, I became the president of the organization the second year after that, and we decided at the time that we really needed to focus on building our presence with the FCC, which is where all of these regulatory decisions that impact the spectrum available to our industry existed. And we hired FCC Regulatory Counsel, and that got us to the point where we are now, where the FCC actually reaches out to us. They listen to what we have to say. We're involved in what the FCC is doing. They know that we're at the table, which was the point of it. So about a year ago, we decided that we needed to have the same presence on the Hill. And now that we'd established ourselves as a viable entity with the FCC, it was time to do the same thing with the Hill. So 2.5 years ago, we had our first advocacy day, and we've been going up to the Hill regularly, and more people on the Hill knew who we were. But we reached a point of maturity in our lobbying message to the Hill where we decided that we actually needed a lobbyist, someone who could be in Washington, focused on our messaging, who could take our message to the Hill on a regular basis, attend these hearings that pop up out of nowhere that are relevant to our industry, basically keep on top of things and help develop our strategy. We issued an RFP. We talked to several companies, and we ended up hiring Ari Storch, who is with Cascade Strategies. And he has not done as much work in telecom, but that was actually a benefit to us because most of the other telecom lawyers represented either large cellular providers or AT&T or Verizon, or people whose interests are not necessarily aligned with WISPs. But what Ari does have experience in is representing small associations. and he has a number of small association clients that he has represented historically. He is a Republican. He's very tied in with the Republican majority. He has a partner who's a Democrat. So one of the other benefits of this firm, as opposed to some of the other firms we looked at, is that they actually have people on both sides of the aisle, and they can work both sides of the aisle. That's very important. I don't know how familiar everyone is with lobbying, but it is a relationship game. You want to have the relationships with these people so that they trust what your lobbyist is saying. And for that reason, you generally have to have somebody who's very in with the Democrats and somebody who's very in with the Republicans. So this firm does have that, has both sides of that. And what he did for us this year is he has started raising the level of our discourse on the Hill. I am the legislative chair for WISPA. I go up there roughly once a month, once every couple of months, and I've met with staffers for key committees so that they already have sort of a pre-understanding of what our positions are. So when we came in this last week for advocacy with 25 people, a lot of the people we met with knew who we were and so we didn't have to go in there and explain, this is who we are, this is, when we did this 2 years ago, nobody knew what fixed wireless was, much less what WISPA was. These people now know that. So Ari was able to get us some key meetings with the chairman of key committees and with key staffers to get our points across. And I think we were very well received. On a monthly basis, he will attend meetings for us on the Hill. He will keep his ear to the ground for anything that's happening. One of the things is that white papers come out all the time. The White House Council for Rural Broadband is a new council formed by the president. They sent out a 12-question white paper. That's something that we're going to be responding to. It's due June 12th. So things like that happen all the time. And the more we're in the mix, the more WISPA's responding, the better we are. But to do that, we have to have somebody kind of on the ground inside the Beltway who can say, look, you need to be at this meeting, or I need to go to this meeting, or no one needs to go to that meeting. Someone who can say, here's this white paper, you need to respond. So that's what he'll be doing for us on a daily basis, continuing this relationship building. He's going to help us draft some legislation, some draft legislation we'll try to find sponsors for. He's working with us on white papers and other talking points for us to take to congressmen both on the Hill and at home. And in addition, one of the things we really liked that he does is he talks about grassroots. One of the things that our members have been very anxious for has been a local strategy. And I do this a lot in Arkansas. My WISP is in Little Rock, Arkansas, for those who don't know me. And I actually do a lot of this in Arkansas, where I am on the Arkansas Broadband Council, and I go to the governor's office, and I talk to our legislators, and I was on Connect Arkansas board, and I am very integrated, and we need to replicate that model for WISPs across the country. A lot of this is done at a local level. So one of the things that Ari is going to help us with is formulating that message and disseminating it across our membership to take down to the local level, and how you play that game locally to ensure that when something comes up on your local state house that affects your industry, they're calling you. And that's really the key thing. You want to be at the table. You want them to know that wireless isn't mobile. Just something as simple as that when you're talking about wireless, it isn't mobile. It can be fixed. We got into this, I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but I got into a fight with Connect Arkansas when they were doing the national broadband map, and they had us on the same map as the mobile carriers. And I said, we're not mobile. You need to put us on the same map with the DSL providers and the fiber providers. And we won that fight. But if we hadn't been at the table, we would have been on the wrong map. So it's important to bring it down to a local level, and one of the things that Ari will be doing for us is helping us outline that strategy and get those pieces disseminated. Which is another reason, honestly, not to push WISPA again, but another reason why if you're a WISP, you should be a member of WISPA, because you'll have access to all of these materials.
Gotcha. Well, no. I mean, everybody should, that is listening in, if you are not already a WISPA member, you really should be taking a look at that. It's very important in all the stuff that we've been talking over the past several weeks on the show here. We've been talking about Title II, pros and cons. We have some people that like it, some people that don't. It is what it is, but it's very important that they know that, hey, there is a industry group for you. There is lots of resources that WISPA has that you can get. All that's really, really good stuff. We just need to keep going down that path, and I'm glad that Ari and such is definitely working for us to help us make sure we don't miss something, because I understand how politics works sometimes. All of a sudden something pops up, hey, let's have a meeting about it, and there's very little notice, just kind of shoved into a back room, and that's how sometimes deals get made, or how sometimes things happen. And that's why he's up there to protect us from those things.
Yes, he is. And also to give us some insight into, we might see a piece of legislation that we think is really great, and we might spend all of our efforts arguing for that piece of legislation only to find that it's never going to make it out of committee. And so that's a waste of energy and a waste of time. And so he can also focus our attention on the messages that are going to resonate, where we're actually going to get some traction and actually get something accomplished, as opposed to things that are never going to get off go because this particular congressman made somebody mad and therefore is not going to go anywhere.
Sure. Oh, you never know until you sit there and try it, or have someone that knows what's going on to help you out.
Yep.
Which is really the big key. Well, what else would you like to make sure that everybody that's listening understands how and where WISPA is going? And that was actually a good question I have. Sure. I do have another question.
Yeah.
Was, whenever we do these advocacy days, we have there's 2 points to it. One is actually going to offices and meeting with people. Mm-hmm. And basically you kind of say the same thing over and over and over, answer questions, etc. And then there's the summit. Can you tell us a little bit more? What does the summit do? Who are the people that attend this summit? And this is kind of like a show that WISPA puts on, but it's just a little policy summit. And who are the people that attend? What are we basically trying to get? Is it basically the same thing when we go to the meetings? We're saying the same thing, except this time it's our meeting, and we have a whole bunch of people listening. How does that work?
Okay, well, this is the first year we've done the summit. I think it was very successful. What we do is we have speakers come in who talk to us about various subjects. This time we had one of the authors of the National Broadband Map, Blair Levin, come in and talk to us about the National Broadband Map retrospective of what they did right, what they got wrong. No, sorry, the National Broadband Plan, not the map, the plan. What was right, what was wrong, what they could have done differently. It was a very interesting speech. We brought in the representative from the national cable people, the small cable providers, to talk about what it is to be a small lobbyist for a small organization on the Hill versus these giant lobbying organizations that have tons and tons of money. So the thing about it is, and this was throughout the summit, WISPA has to lobby smart, because we're not going to lobby rich, because we're not AT&T, none of that kind of deep pocket. So the summit was very focused on how you lobby smart. So we had U.S. Telecom talk about USF. We had NCTA come in and talk about what it is to be a small company lobbying on the Hill. We had the majority staffer for the Energy and Commerce, for the Energy Committee, well, it's the Commerce Committee of the Senate Commerce Committee, that basically the committee that oversees the FCC, come and give us insight into what's going on politically speaking within that committee and with the FCC. And it was very insightful, because the congressmen rely very heavily on the staffers, and this particular staffer has been on the Hill for a long time, and he's been on this committee for a long time. So he has a perspective that gave a very nice overview of what was going on with that committee. And because this was a closed meeting, no press was there, we were able to have a very frank conversation with him and ask questions that maybe he otherwise might not have felt comfortable answering. Then we had a panel on lobbying and what is lobbying. And our lobbyist, Ari, spoke, along with myself, who talked about local and state lobbying, and Forbes Mercy, who's the promotions chair for WISPA, talked about press releases and how you promote yourself in the context of lobbying. And we did a panel on that, essentially to educate on different strategies and how these strategies dovetail with one another. So I think anybody who is interested in learning how things work and kind of getting a peek under the curtain of what goes on in D.C. should come to the next summit. Because the summit is separate from that. If you don't want to go talk to folks on the Hill, you don't have to. The summit is one day, and then the Hill visits are later. So you don't actually have to do both. You can come and just attend the summit. And I recommend it. It's very good content. You learn a lot.
Gotcha. Well, when's the next time that there will be a policy summit? I know we just did one, so is it a yearly, a biannual?
It's probably going to be yearly. We have not discussed having one in the fall. We will have an advocacy trip in the fall, and we may do a summit along with it. But right now the plan would be next spring.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
Let me check here. I just want to make sure we're not missing any questions. Doesn't look like we got any extra questions on here.
Okay.
I do want to make sure I tell all of our listeners that there are some upcoming events before we get off here. We have the Colorado WISP meeting. This is a regional meeting. This is going to be held in Vail, Colorado, June 7th. And then we also have a New York WISP meeting, looks like up in Albany, and that's on June 12th. I do know that they are planning. Looks like we're looking at one in Illinois. I think it's going to be in Naperville up near Chicago, and that's going to be in June as well. And then you said there's another one that hasn't been, we don't have a date yet for.
Yes, it'll be in July, and it will be for, it'll be Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, that region.
So probably
it'll be held probably in Texas, probably Dallas.
Gotcha. Not a problem. And you had a special name for it.
Arklatex. It's the Arklatex.
That's just great. I love it.
Before we go, if we have a couple more minutes.
We got time, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to share with you kind of something I hadn't touched on, which is, we have other issues we can discuss too if you want to talk about any of these things, which, municipal broadband or what's going on with the USDA. But I did want to address the administration, because one of the things that I think the WISP industry in general has not been as effective at has been getting the administration to understand the role we play. And we started this in the December advocacy trip, where we actually met with the head of the President's Council on Rural Broadband and Rural Development, Council on Rural Development, and we educated them on fixed wireless. I don't know if you watch the reports that come out of the administration, but none of them mention fixed wireless. When they talk about next generation internet technology, they're not talking about us. They're talking about different types of fiber or other types of wired services, but they're not talking about us. So that's something that we have to correct. To that end, we've reached out to the President's Council on Rural Affairs, and we're reaching out to the President's Council on Broadband, which is a newly formed council, and we're starting the process of educating both the administration and the candidates who are running for office for 2016 on who we are and what we represent and the part we play. It's very important that all three, that the administrative branch of FCC, that the legislative Congress understands, and that the administration understands who we are. So a lot of this is driven from the administration, whether or not they have a majority in Congress.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's talk about, you said something about the, what is it, not USF, the...
USDA?
Yes, USDA.
USDA is the agriculture folks.
Right.
US
and I know they provide tons of loans and
correct.
Things like that, and a lot of, I know some WISPs have taken advantage of that, some have not.
Yes.
So
yes.
What's going on with them that we, I haven't heard this, so what's going on with them that we need to know about?
Well, they have a grant program, and it's got a really long name, Community-Oriented Connectivity Broadband Grants. And they are specifically for broadband into small, poor, rural communities. And they've given a number of these grants over the years. We, in fact, applied for one back in 2010. 2013, they made a rules change. And now, in order to get a grant, the community has to have literally nothing, not even cellular service. And the threshold for cellular service is 3 megs aggregate.
Okay.
So if you're in a rural community that has nothing, not even DSL, but you have a cell tower, you now cannot get one of these grants.
And that's again going back to this whole idea that they don't understand the difference between mobile,
correct,
and fixed.
Correct. And I put together a white paper. The legislative committee put together a white paper for basically as a leave behind, explaining the difference between mobile and fixed wireless. And so when we were on the Hill, the reason we were talking to the Ag Committee was to get them to understand that rural America is entitled to mobile broadband, and we're not saying they're not, but it is not a substitute for fixed broadband. You're not going to get a company, let's say you're an economic development officer in teeny town, Arkansas, I'll pick one, and you want to bring in a company into your community. The first thing that company is going to ask is, what do you have for internet connectivity? What broadband do you have? And if your answer is, well, we got MiFi cards, that will not encourage a business to come in. It's not an economic development tool to say, yeah, we got cellular. That's not how those communities grow. You need cellular, 100%. But the idea that, and the USDA had a colorable reason. There's a good legal term, meaning it makes some sense. It's colorable reason for why they did this, which is we have a limited pot of money and we want to make it go as far as we can, so we're only going to serve those communities that truly, truly, truly have nothing.
Right.
The problem is it's eliminated communities like one we're looking at, Humnoak, Arkansas, that practically have nothing, because where they measure the cellular service is I think it's within 100 feet or 100 yards of the tower. So
so you can always, that's kind of...
Of course you get 3 megs aggregate there.
Yeah, we would hope, anyway.
Well, they're right off the freeway, too. This town is right off the freeway. So we made that point to several people, and they completely got it. They understood, and they were very supportive. They didn't really completely understand where the USDA was coming from. They did understand that it was not the right conclusion. So we're hopeful. We have some people who are willing to write letters on our behalf to the USDA. We have some people on the Agricultural Finance Committee who are willing to ask some pointy questions about this. So that's been really good, and hopefully we can free up some of those. People can take them or not. We have some WISPs who will never take government money, and that's great. But if it's going to be made available, it needs to be made available on a fair and equal basis to everybody.
Gotcha. That's the differences, and it's just people don't understand technology, and it's really horrible to say, but we get this all the time where the people that is regulating the industries are not people that really understand the industry.
Yeah, which is I think kind of our job then, is to educate them on what they don't know.
Yeah. Gotcha. All righty. Well, Elisabeth, I think we've covered all the questions I have. If you have any final words for our listeners, we'll be glad to hear them.
I don't, other than please get involved. Whether you're a member of WISPA or not, it's very important that your voice is heard on a local level. And all of these reps who are in D.C., they come home. And a lot of times it's easier to find them in district at home. And you should do that. You should go visit them, get to know them, because you never know when something might come up where you'd like to have a meeting. And the more time you spend getting to know what's going on in your local politics and getting to know your national representatives, the more effective you're going to be when issues come up.
There we go. We have an absolutely great show with Elisabeth. Elisabeth, thank you very much for being on the show. Again, next week we will have our show again, 11 a.m. Central. I hope to see everybody there next week. Thank you very much, and have a great week.
Thank you for listening to ISP Radio. We hope you've gained new insights and additional wisdom in our industry as well as your business. Please remember to visit our show sponsors via the links on ispradio.com. If you're interested in becoming a show sponsor, contact us at sales@ispradio.com. Now go out there and push those packets as fast as you can. Good luck and Godspeed.